What if the pain of being ignored isn't just emotional, but a full body reaction happening deep inside you right now? Silence hits differently when it feels personal. Inside the body, a storm quietly begins, heart rate shifts, stress hormones rise, and the brain interprets social rejection as real danger. Neural pathways linked to physical pain activate, creating a sensation that feels heavy, sharp, and deeply real. Cortisol floods the system, energy drops, and thoughts spiral into self-doubt. At the same time, the body prepares for survival, not connection. This invisible chain reaction reveals something powerful. Being ignored is not just in the mind, it's a biological experience wired into human existence, shaping emotions, behavior, and even long-term mental health. When a person is ignored, the brain does not simply register it as a normal social moment. It processes it in a way that is surprisingly similar to physical pain. The same neural regions that activate when the body experiences injury also become active during emotional rejection, especially areas like the anterior cingulate cortex. This creates a real sensation of discomfort that is not imagined but biologically generated. The brain treats social disconnection as a threat to survival because, from an evolutionary perspective, being accepted by a group was essential for protection and survival. As a result, even subtle signs of neglect or exclusion can trigger a deep internal alarm system. This is why emotional rejection can feel sharp, heavy, or even unbearable at times. The nervous system does not clearly separate emotional and physical experiences. Instead, it merges them into one unified response. This overlap explains why a simple act like being ignored in conversation or not receiving a response can feel physically painful in the chest or stomach area. Body reacts with tension, altered breathing, and changes in heart rhythm, reinforcing the sensation that something harmful is happening. Over time, repeated experiences of social pain can make the brain even more sensitive to rejection, strengthening these neural pathways and increasing emotional intensity in future situations where attention or validation is absent. When a person experiences being ignored, the body activates a stress response system that is closely linked to survival mechanisms. One of the key hormones involved in this process is cortisol, often referred to as the primary stress hormone. As soon as the brain interprets social rejection or lack of attention, it signals the adrenal glands to release cortisol into the bloodstream. This sudden spike prepares the body for a perceived threat, even though the danger is emotional rather than physical. Heart rate may increase, breathing can become shallow, and muscles may tense as the body shifts into a state of alertness. This response is designed to help a person react quickly in dangerous situations, but in social experiences like being ignored, it becomes internal and unresolved. The elevated cortisol levels also begin to affect cognitive functions, making it harder to think clearly or regulate emotions. Memory, focus, and decision-making can temporarily weaken as the brain prioritizes emotional survival over rational processing. At the same time, prolonged exposure to elevated cortisol can disturb internal balance, affecting sleep patterns, energy levels, and overall mood stability. The body remains in a subtle state of stress, even when the external situation has not changed. This continuous hormonal activation reinforces feelings of anxiety and emotional discomfort, creating a loop where the mind and body remain stuck in a heightened stress state, triggered by something as seemingly simple as social disconnection. When a person feels ignored, the brain rapidly shifts into a protective mode that is designed to detect and respond to potential threats. This system is often referred to as the brain's social threat detection mechanism, and it is deeply rooted in human survival biology. In early human evolution, being excluded from a group could mean losing access to food, safety, and protection, so the brain developed a highly sensitive system to detect even the smallest signs of rejection. When social attention is withdrawn, specific areas of the brain, such as the amygdala, become highly active, scanning for danger and interpreting the situation as a possible form of exclusion. This activation is not logical or conscious, it happens automatically and within milliseconds. The prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for rational thinking, often becomes less dominant during this process, allowing emotional reactions to take control. As a result, the individual may overanalyze simple situations, searching for reasons behind the lack of response or attention. This heightened sensitivity can make neutral or unclear social signals feel negative or threatening. The brain begins to prioritize self-protection over social connection, which can lead to defensive thoughts, increased anxiety, and emotional confusion. Even in the absence of real danger, the internal alarm system continues to operate, creating a sense of urgency or unease. This mechanism is so powerful that it can influence perception, making the person believe they are unwanted or excluded even when there is no intentional rejection. Over time, repeated activation of this system can strengthen neural pathways associated with fear of abandonment, making the brain even more reactive to future moments of perceived neglect or social distance. When a person feels ignored, the mind often enters a gradual emotional withdrawal process that begins almost silently but becomes more intense over time. The first stage is confusion, where the brain tries to understand the lack of response or attention and searches for meaning in small details. If the situation continues, the emotional system starts to protect itself by reducing emotional openness. This is not a conscious choice but a defense mechanism designed to prevent further emotional discomfort. The brain begins to lower expectations of connection, and the person may slowly detach from the situation or the people involved. As this happens, emotional energy that was previously directed towards social interaction starts turning inward. Thoughts become more self-focused, and the mind begins to replay past interactions repeatedly, trying to find reasons or patterns that explain the experience. This internal loop can intensify feelings of loneliness and self-doubt, even when no real rejection was intended. At the neurological level, the reward system of the brain, particularly dopamine pathways, becomes less active in response to social signals, making interactions feel less rewarding or meaningful. This reduction in emotional reward reinforces the withdrawal process, creating a cycle where reduced connection leads to reduced motivation for connection. The body also mirrors this shift, often showing signs such as low energy, reduced facial expressiveness, and slower responses in communication. As emotional withdrawal continues, the mind may begin to create protective narratives, convincing itself that detachment is safer than engagement. These thoughts can become automatic, shaping how future interactions are perceived. Even neutral behavior from others may be interpreted as lack of interest, further deepening the cycle. Over time, this loop can affect emotional resilience, making it harder to re-engage socially or trust emotional availability from others. The longer this pattern continues, the more the brain adapts to a state of emotional self-protection, where connection feels uncertain and withdrawal feels familiar, shaping both perception and response in subtle but powerful ways that continue influencing behavior even in new social environments. When a person repeatedly experiences being ignored, the sense of self-worth begins to shift in subtle but powerful ways inside the mind. The brain does not treat social feedback as neutral information. It uses it as a reference point for self-evaluation. When attention, response, or acknowledgement is missing, the mind may start interpreting this absence as a reflection of personal value rather than a situational behavior. This creates a distortion in self-perception, where internal identity becomes shaped by external silence. Over time, the brain begins to form cognitive patterns that link lack of response with lack of importance, even when no real evidence supports this conclusion. These thought patterns are reinforced by emotional memory, which stores the feeling of being ignored as a meaningful experience. Each repetition strengthens this association, making it more automatic and harder to challenge with rational thinking. The prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for logical reasoning, may struggle to override these emotional interpretations, especially when the experience is frequent or intense. As a result, self-talk begins to change, becoming more critical, uncertain, or questioning in nature. The individual may start doubting their presence in social spaces, their ability to be noticed, or their worthiness of attention. This shift does not happen suddenly. It builds gradually through accumulated emotional responses that reshape internal belief systems. At the same time, the brain's reward system becomes less responsive to positive social cues, meaning even moments of inclusion or attention may not feel as impactful as before. This imbalance between negative and positive social interpretation deepens the distortion. The nervous system also plays a role, as chronic stress from perceived rejection can heighten emotional sensitivity, making the person more reactive to even small signs of disinterest. This heightened sensitivity reinforces the belief that exclusion is happening more often than it actually is. In this state, perception becomes filtered through emotional bias, where neutral or ambiguous behavior is interpreted in a negative way. Gradually, the identity begins to align with these repeated interpretations, creating an internal narrative that feels increasingly real to the individual. This narrative can influence confidence, communication style, and willingness to engage socially, shaping behavior in ways that continue to reinforce the original perception loop without conscious awareness. And the experience of being ignored continues over time. It can create long-term changes in how the brain and body regulate emotions, stress, and social interaction. The nervous system becomes more sensitive to rejection-related cues, meaning even small or unclear social signals can trigger strong emotional reactions. This heightened sensitivity develops through repeated activation of stress and pain pathways, which gradually lowers the threshold required for the brain to perceive social threat. As a result, situations that are neutral or ambiguous may begin to feel emotionally charged or unsafe. The body stays in a semi-alert state where stress hormones can be more easily released, even without a clear external trigger. This ongoing internal stress affects emotional balance, making it harder to return to a calm baseline after social discomfort. Over time, the brain's ability to regulate emotional responses can become strained, leading to faster emotional escalation and slower recovery. In the long term, memory systems also begin to adapt. Emotional memories linked to social rejection become more dominant, and the brain may prioritize these experiences when interpreting new social situations. This creates a filtering effect where past emotional pain influences present perception. The hippocampus and amygdala work together to store and retrieve these emotional associations, and when they are repeatedly activated, the emotional response becomes more automatic. This can lead to patterns where the expectation of being ignored or excluded appears even before any real social interaction unfolds. The reward system in the brain may also undergo changes. Social interactions that once felt rewarding may begin to feel less satisfying if they are frequently paired with emotional discomfort. Dopamine response can become irregular, reducing the natural motivation to engage socially. This does not mean the desire for connection disappears, but it can become mixed with hesitation, caution, or emotional fatigue. The brain begins to balance the need for connection with the need for self-protection, often leaning toward protection when past experiences have been painful. Physically, long-term social stress can influence sleep quality, energy levels, and overall body regulation. The autonomic nervous system may remain more reactive, with subtle signs like tension in muscles, irregular breathing patterns, or fatigue becoming more common. These physical responses reinforce emotional states, creating a feedback loop between body and mind where stress and interpretation continuously influence each other. At a psychological level, repeated experiences of being ignored can shape identity-related beliefs. The mind may begin to develop stable assumptions about how others will respond, which can influence future behavior. These beliefs are not always conscious but operate as background expectations that guide interaction patterns. This can lead to reduced openness in communication, hesitation in expressing needs, or increased sensitivity to perceived rejection in new environments. Over time, the combination of neurological, hormonal, emotional, and cognitive changes creates a deeply integrated response system that shapes how social reality is experienced. The brain becomes highly efficient at predicting emotional risk, but this efficiency can also limit openness to new interpretations. Even positive or neutral social experiences may be filtered through protective patterns developed from past emotional pain, influencing how connection, trust, and belonging are felt in everyday life.